Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. Hi. We'll be starting in just a minute. We're letting people in our room. So thank you for being here. My name is Ana Sofia Ruiz, and I'm portfolio manager in D4D.net. We're very happy to have you here. So we're just about to start. Okay. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are. As I was saying, my name is Ana Sofia Ruiz, and I'm portfolio manager in data for development, or as we call it, D4D.net. Thank you for joining us in this first webinar. Let's talk about data and AI that we have developed along with the Datasphere Initiative and the Global Index for Responsible AI. We are thrilled to have you here. Short introduction about D4D. D4D is a global research alliance that strengthens collaboration across a broad network of stakeholders. By developing and mobilizing the knowledge needed to advance the ethical use of data to address critical development challenges across the global south. We believe that the responsible use of data can help us to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, understand the impact of the COVID crisis, or identify key priority areas for development programming to be addressed in the future.
Hello.
So without further ado, let me introduce you to our moderator today, Carolina Rossini. She's the Director of Partnerships and Research in the Datasphere Initiative. Carolina, over to you.
Hi, Anna, and hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. As Anna said, I am the Director of Partnerships and Research at the Datasphere and one of its co-founders. And I'm very glad to embark in this webinar series with D4D, who has been an incredible partner since we started the Datasphere. We started a couple of years ago, but we actually formally incorporated just at the end of last year. We were being incubated by the Internet and Jurisdiction Network. For a matter of quick interview of the Datasphere, we are a foundation, a nonprofit foundation that has its mission to build agile frameworks to responsibly unlock the value of data for all. And I invite you to check our website, where we have lots of interesting publications, including, for example, on cross-border sandboxes, some of the dialogues we are doing around the world, like in Europe, and many other interesting publications, including the Datasphere Governance Atlas, where we list over 250 organizations around the world working on data governance issues. So thank you so much again for being here. And without further delay, let's jump in this panel. So as we all know, data is fundamental to artificial intelligence, and there is a direct relationship between the quality and quantity of what's fed into a machine learning application, and the accuracy and relevancy, relevancy of its output. While data governance has traditionally been viewed in terms of complying with regulations stipulating how data must be collected, stored, and processed, AI has introduced new challenges and risks to the data and to its management. It's no longer enough to obtain vast amount of data. It's no longer enough to have big data. One needs to purposefully consider its characteristics, where it's coming from, what does it actually represent, what it will support, does it support inclusive, democratic principles, distribution of benefits, equity, which are all concerns we have at the very core of the work at the Datasphere. Other questions that come up in these considerations of what data should be fed into artificial intelligence are, is there anything you need to account for before feeding that data into your algorithm? To progress in making improvements in responsible AI, it is crucial that we understand the current state of play and that we are able to monitor the progress with time and assess the impacts of those processes. That is why today we have the honor, as I was mentioning, to co-host this first kickoff meeting with the D4D network through this panel, and with being joined by all of you. So please make sure to introduce yourself in the chat, and also share perhaps why you are here, if you work in this area, where you are calling from, so we ensure that you are all joined this vibrant network. This first kickoff event with of the Datasphere and the D4D network, it's called AI and Data Webinar, is within the AI and Data Webinar series that we can share the link in the chat. And we will discuss questions that need to be asked to ensure that good data governance happens for AI and identify the challenges we still have to deal with. So I invite Dr. Rachel Adam to present an effort by D4D called Global AI Index and to kickstart this panel. Dr. Rachel Adams is the principal investigator of the Global Index on Responsible AI. She's also principal researcher at Research ICT Africa, where she directs the AI4D Africa, Just AI project, and the AI4D African Observatory for Responsible AI. Rachel is an associate fellow at the Leverhulme Center for Future of Intelligence at the University of Cambridge, editor of the South African Journal on Human Rights, and a member of the UNESCO expert group on the implementation of the UNESCO recommendations on AI in ethics. And before I pass the word to Rachel, I think we're gonna watch a little video about the Global Index. Anna.
Hi, sorry, no, I think we have to go to Rachel before that.
Okay, so Rachel, please go ahead.
Thank you, Carolina. It's so exciting to see so many familiar faces and names, and welcome to new friends of D4D and Datasphere, and of this very exciting project, the Global Index on Responsible AI, that I will be talking about today, and really giving you all a kind of sneak peek on what the Global Index seeks to be covering and measuring over this next year. So the video will follow. The video is a bit more slick than I am, but let me find my presentation. And Carolina, please just stop me if I'm taking too long. Yes. We go to presentation mode. If I can find a slideshow. Is this fine? Is this, you can see it's all good? Yeah,
it's coming.
Okay. Okay, so the Global Index on Responsible AI is a new project of the D4D network. It is hosted at Research ICT Africa, where I am based. It is also part of the AI4D network of organizations and funding initiatives on the African continent, and it is funded by the International Development Research Centre, IDRC, Canada. So the initiative arose from recognition of the very, yes.
The presentation has not loaded on my side. I don't know if it appears for others. Perhaps you can refresh your browser.
Oh, is that what I should do? Okay, yes.
Well, let's try, right? Because it's just loading. Yeah, try slideshow again.
Okay. Has it worked now? Are you on background slide?
No.
Do you think maybe it's better if I leave it on this view?
Yes, that's like that, exactly.
And that it's not too small. Okay, so the project arose the recognition that artificial intelligence represented a really complex policy space, and that efforts around the world to advance the responsible, the rights-respecting use of AI were disparate. There have been a number of principles and standards and instruments that have been developed, but there isn't a comprehensive tool that seeks to track how far the implementation of these tools and practices are. So that was part of the decision to establish a globally relevant tool to track progress and commitments towards responsible AI in countries from around the world. Of course, what responsible AI means is different things in different parts of the world, and part of what this project will be doing is seeking to understand how responsible AI is interpreted in very different country and regional contexts. But broadly speaking, we're defining responsible AI as the development, use, and governance of AI in ways that fully uphold all human rights, and I'll come to talk about how we're defining human rights, and democratic values through the AI life cycle and value chain. So we're looking at the concept of artificial intelligence in a very broad way, looking at everything from the development of the data systems used to train artificial intelligence to the end of cycle and the environmental impact that AI can have on environments and communities around the world. The aim of the index is then to assess whether the country conditions exist to support and promote the responsible use of AI and to track what progress looks like over time. This is a study that we hope will be longitudinal, and I think the real value of it is over time and over the different editions that we hope to produce. The first edition being published later this year, and then the second edition will follow 2 years later in 2025. So our objectives is to establish a systematized human rights-based benchmarks and measurement areas for responsible AI, and I'm going to show you what some of those look like. Then to assess the country conditions to support and promote responsible AI. We seek to generate evidence for decision makers at all levels, from national policymakers to international and regional policymakers, to advance responsible AI efforts and work collectively together. And of course, to support the realization of AI ethics and responsible AI principles in practice. Some of the key elements of this study is the human rights-based approach, the primary and secondary data around key indicators. I wonder if we could just put those of you who are not on mute. We will be publishing the results on an open data portal so that other researchers and interested parties and stakeholders can access and manipulate the data and see how we came to the rankings and the scorings that we have. In order to collect the data around the world, we're establishing a global network of independent country researchers in at least 120 countries. We are developing contextualized results where the design of the index has been informed by regional consultations, and the analysis of the data will also be informed by our regional partners, and many of you are in the room today. And then we hope to obviously establish means of conducting really rigorous comparative analysis about, as Carolina spoke about earlier, the state of the art of responsible AI around the world. So at present, we're structuring the global index. The design of it is structured under 4 dimensions. The first dimension is on human rights and artificial intelligence, and you can see the 2 sub-dimensions of human rights and collective rights there. And I'll go into all of this in a bit more detail. The second dimension is looking at responsible AI governance. The third dimension is looking at national responsible AI capacities to meet the commitments made under the responsible AI governance dimension. And the fourth dimension that is collected through secondary data. So the first 3 dimensions are collected through primary data collection, through a questionnaire that is filled out by all the country researchers. The fourth dimension is established through secondary data and key secondary data indicators, looking at the broader environment needed at a country level to support the advancement of responsible AI. So you can see at a different kind of depiction of this, we have the global index split into these 4 dimensions with their sub-dimensions. So as mentioned, the first dimension is human rights in artificial intelligence, with the premise that the protection of and respect for fundamental human rights and collective rights and freedoms is paramount to the responsible development and use of AI around the world. And so we're assessing the extent to which countries are taking steps to protect key human rights and collective rights that are implicated by AI. So here you can see the kind of key thematic areas that we're examining under these two sub-dimensions. The thematic areas are then split into indicators that offer more precise measurement areas, but we're looking at gender equality, access to remedy and redress, data protection and privacy, bias and non-discrimination, education and skills development over primary, secondary and tertiary education around artificial intelligence, and the protection of children's rights that may be at risk from the use of AI. The second dimension looks at collective rights. So when we were conducting the consultations in the design of this project and asking stakeholders in very different parts of the world what they would like this index to measure and to look like and to include, there was a lot of conversations around the limitations of an individualistic approach to human rights and the importance of collective rights, including labor protections, the protection of cultural diversity and indigenous and local languages that are being collated into language sets for artificial intelligence, environmental protection, and a community level data sovereignty. So not national level data sovereignty, but data communities' rights over their own data as all fundamental to the human rights that are implicated by AI use. So the second dimension then assesses the responsible AI governance that we expect to be in place, therefore measuring the extent to which countries and governments are establishing and implementing key governance tools for responsible AI. So as we're assessing these different areas of AI governance, we're really not just looking at, is there a law, is there a framework in place, but we're asking the researchers to assess the extent to which these laws and frameworks are being implemented, the extent to which there are actions by governments to advance implementation of particular laws and frameworks through government programs, policies, budget allocations, and so forth. So the first sub-dimension pertains to the rule of law. And you can see many of the key principles and issue areas that many of us immediately associate with AI ethics and responsible AI. Then we move into the enabling policy environment around a national AI policy, the requirement of impact assessment tools for social impact assessments, privacy impact assessments, environmental impact assessments, and the existence of regulation, which we expect to be at a policy level at this stage in the maturity of AI policy for social media. Then the last one under responsible AI governance, the last sub-dimension, is the technical standards that we expect to be in place to protect rights at risk from AI use.
Rachel,
yes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes, that's fine. We're on dimension 3. The third dimension covers the capacities we expect to exist at a national level to advance on the commitments made under the previous dimension. So just to provide an overview of this, this includes the institutions required, the investment, and the competencies, which include skills development in the civil service and judiciary, AI leadership, and of course, as well, international cooperation. The last dimension, through secondary data collection, will look at these various broader factors and conditions that need to be in place to ensure the responsible use and development of AI, including internet connectivity, national computing capacity, various fundamental commitments to fundamental human rights established within regional or international human rights canon. Then, Carolina, the last thing I want to kind of touch on before I close is the complementary study that we are undertaking in alignment with the Global Index, which is the Global Survey on AI Use and Misuse. And this is what we had originally developed as a kind of dimension 0 of the index, as it was going to be a dimension that wasn't scored. So the data that we collect through this survey is not part of the scoring of the global index, but provides us with critical examples and understanding of the level of penetration of AI within any given jurisdiction, what sectors it's operating in, and what evidence of AI misuse in terms of what kind of key issue areas, human rights-based issue areas, are arising. And I think this will provide us with fundamental information with which to deepen the analysis out of the index findings itself, but also to assess in the review of the first edition of the index how far these different measurement areas that we've developed as comprising the concept of responsible AI match up with how AI is being used and misused in different country contexts. So, Carolina, I'm going to pause it here and really look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. And I will now then share the video. So bear with me for 1 second. So it gives overviews and a summary of the index. Can you see the video?
The Global Index on Responsible AI is a new instrument being designed to support decision makers and stakeholders from around the world to develop and use AI that respects human rights and strengthens democracy. AI is having a significant impact on almost every aspect of our daily lives. But while AI can drive innovations that improve access to healthcare for millions of citizens, it can also power mass surveillance or potentially undermine civil liberties. The Global Index on Responsible AI will provide much-needed insight into the conditions required to ensure AI supports human rights, gender equality, and sustainable development. By establishing an international network of independent researchers, the Global Index will assess progress towards responsible AI in over 120 countries.
Thank you. So as you guys can see, it's a tremendous effort that D4D and specifically Rachel are leading. And I love when indexes come together because they are not only an evaluation tool, but they can actually help us as an assessment and a roadmap tool, right, for the development of new policies that are more comprehensive and holistic. So going back to our program, I want to invite Dr. Emma Roetkamp-Blowen and Dr. Albra Anthony to join us. Sorry if help me to pronounce your name, but in terms of introductions, Emma is the AI ethics research professor and head of the Department of Philosophy at University of Pretoria. She's the leader of ethics of artificial intelligence research group at the Center for Artificial Intelligence Research, CAR, in South Africa. She has a PhD in philosophy, in mathematical logic and philosophy of science. She was the chairperson for the UNESCO ad hoc expert group that prepared the draft of the 2021 UNESCO Global Recommendations on the Ethics of AI, and a current member of the UNESCO ad hoc expert group working on implementing those recommendations. She's also the rapporteur for the UNESCO Commission on Ethics and Scientific Knowledge and Technology. Dr. Albra Anthony, she's a senior fellow at the Technology and International Affairs at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where she researches social-cultural implications of the rapid evolution of digital technologies and data-driven approaches in emerging markets. Before joining Carnegie, Albra worked at the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, where she developed their strategy and was the research leader at the Innovation, Technology, and Research Hub. She also led other researchers to investigate influential trends in digital development and responsible use of emerging technologies. And finally, she led the development of USAID Artificial Intelligence Action Plan, launched by Administrator Power in 2022. So as you all can see, we are incredible, well accompanied here today. And I have a couple of questions for you, Emma and Albra. Perhaps you could start presenting some of your reactions to this index, its formation, its idea, its usability, and what is the importance of this index at this time? Albra?
Sure, happy to jump in and then we'll hand it to you, Emma. And thanks so much for the invitation to join. I'm really excited to hear from others and also to hear from Rachel about the development that this has undergone over the last several months. So I've been involved in the responsible AI community, this kind of push globally for several years now, both as an observer, trying to kind of understand the how research translates into practice, right? How our understanding of AI harms may manifest and how we can get out ahead of that. And I think it's fair to say that as the responsible AI space has evolved, what started off as a very research-heavy community that was very research-oriented, it then evolved to becoming far more principles-oriented, right? As you mentioned, Carolina, the recent UNESCO ethical guidelines, as well as the OECD AI principles from a few years back, that was sort of the movement that this whole community has gone through. And I think we all now, I think it's fair to say, have a pretty broad appreciation that at this point, there's a need to be cautious, if not flat out worried, about AI's ability to infringe on human rights, right? I think that there's enough of an evidence base there that we understand that we need to do something about it. That we need to work in an intentional and concerted way to hold AI in check. But I think the community in some ways has now come to a moment where there's a collective realization that while principles are very important, they're a necessary first step, they're nowhere near enough, right? And so I think, you know, we can agree at a high level that AI should do no harm, that AI should preserve and protect rights. But in order for that to actually translate into action and into accountability, we have to have a shared understanding of what we actually mean by AI should do no harm. That's a really difficult thing, right? And what we mean when we say using AI responsibly is important. And so if we lack that clarity, if we lack that consensus, then the problem, as I see it, is that all of this fantastic work in developing the principles ends up running the risk of just becoming another mechanism for ethics washing, right? That if we don't have clarity and consensus about specific elements, you know, what we actually mean by responsible AI, that principles alone are not going to do the hard and necessary work of pushing us into uncomfortable debates about where we want to be as a society with respect to AI. And so I think that's one of the strengths that the index offers, right? If all of our principles are actually to translate into action, they have to be interpretable, right? And clearly broken down and defined robustly enough that they're meaningful across all of the different contexts in which AI is taking root. Not just the global north, right? This also means the global south. This means the whole world. And importantly, some of the core challenges in AI, I think, still stem from a lack of representation of those who.
Yes, you got mute suddenly. You're mute. Yeah, unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I think it says something muted me. Okay, let me know if that happens again. So just even there, so even just a simple fact, and this is definitely not a criticism at all of the organizers of this panel, more just a criticism of society writ large, but you can't ignore that even in this discussion, right? Those of us who are shaping the contours of what we're, you know, describing here, we're all white women, right? We're all women, you know, of a certain age, of a certain privilege level. And even while we have a very good degree of international diversity, one of the difficulties here is that our understanding of what's fair, everyone's understanding of what's fair and what's responsible, will inevitably be shaped by our worldview and how we define equity and how we define bias, right? And that's, to me, tied to one of the more fundamental challenges here around ensuring that our ability to keep AI in check is not playing into old hierarchical structures of power, right? Where those of us who are in more economically advantaged countries are defining what this means. Even those of us who care deeply about this issue, this should be a more representative effort. And so this is a really big part of why I see the index as a real strength and a positive step forward for the global AI community, right? Its construction, its means of being tested and piloted, all of those things are being done in a consultative and ideally representative way that centers inputs from a greater range of countries and actors than have, I would say, been largely overlooked in some of the previous conversations around this. And so I see that as a really big step forward. I'll stop there. I know Emma probably has lots of things to offer, but that's a snapshot of the biggest strengths that I see right now from the index.
Thank you, Albra. Emma?
Thank you. Trying not to duplicate. I'll try to be a little bit more specific first in terms of exactly what I think the value of this particular index is, and then maybe say a few more general things about indexes. I think to measure evolution of commitment to responsible use and focusing on human rights and sustainability, and then gender equality, but all three, in a sense, somehow at the back of many of the principles of the main policies out there, but not really on a, you know, on a kind of practical level. It's important to measure this kind of progress and to have this kind of index, because it can highlight to the general public also that essential awareness of the fact that designing and developing and deploying and using AI in line with basic human rights will empower companies to engender trust and scale AI technologies with confidence, because the impact on customers and society will be fair, transparent, and responsible. And you can think, why the hell am I talking about companies? We're like talking about, you know, very, you know, in general, maybe more, but I think it's important that we always should keep in mind that the way in which tech companies operate in a given country is an indicator of how much a government is protecting their citizens. So I always keep an eye on the private sector for that and many other reasons. Also, this index is different from obviously the well-known Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI's index, which tracks and collates data relating to AI in order to enable decision makers to make meaningful action or to take meaningful action to advance AI responsibly. And I think this focus on human rights may actually inform that kind of meaningful action, because this index is different. It's also different from, there are many indexes, but there's a Tortoise Media Global AI Index that at the moment only covers 62 countries, but that one is based on investment, innovation, and implementation. Again, not focused on responsible AI, again, not focused on human rights, again, not focused on sustainability. So I really think this index fills a gap as far as indexes are concerned. And I also think that we have to, in this move from what to how, from principles to implementation, also from UNESCO's side, I think it's really important to understand that we have to always keep in mind that we are dealing with countries that are at different stages of readiness to realize responsible AI governance. And companies are also at different stages of readiness, not just countries, because we deal with different kinds of companies and different companies, countries in different sectors and different sizes of company. So an index is always a way to kind of help informing a country or a company about their readiness state, to have some kind of level of comparison. And also pointing perhaps, maybe indirectly, and maybe I'm very idealistic, but I think what is also important is that we should maybe also try to interpret what an index tells us about the ecosystem within which AI is designed, developed, deployed, used, and governed. Because, complying with legislation doesn't happen in a vacuum. One needs to have the right kind of environment, and that can mean a lot of things. So again, it speaks to readiness, and again, I think indexes are there very, very helpful. So I see this index as making a very filling a gap and making an important contribution to helping with this stepping down from principles to the real world. Thank you.
Sorry, I've been mute. Thank you, Emma and Albra, for all the comments, and thank you all for the inputs in the chat. So, Rachel, coming back to you, D4D also does a lot of work on data issues, right? Historically, a lot of your community comes from the open data community. Why, in your opinion, is data governance crucial for AI, right? Which is one of the core topics of this panel. And more specifically, how we can responsibly unlock the value of data for all, so AI systems are more inclusive and produce more equitable results. Rachel.
Yeah, thank you very much, Carolina. And certainly we have, in the development of the project and architecture of the Global Index, learned enormously from the Global Data Barometer, which is our sister project at ILDA in Uruguay, that was published in 2022. So that's a key secondary data source for us. And so one of the kind of tricky conceptual questions for us was, how far do we squarely address, do we seek to collect primary data against issues that pertain more broadly to data governance than necessarily specifically artificial intelligence? And it's a complex and conflated issue, and in the end it came down to slightly more practical issues of where there already existed very strong secondary data sources on, for example, availability of publicly held data. Speaking from an African perspective, where I work with many colleagues in this room and with many African policymakers on supporting the development of policies around artificial intelligence, good data governance policies is an essential both foundation and enabler for responsible AI. So one of the really key things on the continent is the need for data sharing frameworks, because a huge issue in the development of AI and the kind of global fairness and equity in the development of AI is who has access to data and how much does it cost them to access data, and who has the resources to be able to pay for data that they cannot readily access. And so these kind of issues around data availability, standardization and categorization of data, what data can be shared and how and with whom, are absolutely fundamental to addressing some of the deeper structural issues that are related to artificial intelligence, not just the issues of input, output, and bias, but who is able to participate in the kind of global economy of AI. And then I think the kind of other question around data that is, and Emma can really speak to this issue, is around underrepresentative and unrepresentative data sets. So with the development of AI, the biggest data sets are those that are held online or produced through the internet. So when we're talking about fairness at a data collection level, or fairness in the representativity of data on the African continent, we're looking at who is using the internet, and who is using the internet is a deeply divided question. There's a growing gender divide in access to internet resources on the African continent. The access to smartphones is not widespread at all. Internet connectivity, so a whole other range of issues, infrastructural issues associated with questions of equity and access and structure are embedded within this question of data governance. I really plea for a deeper understanding beyond data protection and data privacy frameworks. I'll pause there, Carolina.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And I wonder, right? And I want to hear Emma and Albra reactions to this. we see in data governance, and Mariana, perhaps you can help me and add that blog to the chat so people can read it later. We did this mapping of around 34, 35 principles on data governance, especially principles coming from vulnerable communities and represented communities, right? You can think about original populations, indigenous, different names in different countries, LGBTQ, so forth and so on. And I wonder how much some of those principles help or create even unintended consequences and barriers for the use of the data of those communities, right, to feed into good AI. I'm always thinking as a lawyer in policy, like, okay, what are the consequences intended and what are perhaps some unintended consequences? We haven't done that analysis, but when you were talking about privacy and vulnerable include, I'm wondering now, what are some of the consequences there? Are there barriers being created unintendedly or not, right, while protecting privacy and so forth and so on? Emma, Albra, do you want to jump in?
I can jump in first, or Emma, if you have an immediate thought. Okay, I can jump in. I think those are really, really important questions, and I'm so glad that you're raising them. I think for a long time, I've wrestled with this issue of some of the best practices that we have for preserving individuals' privacy, right? Data minimization, for example, can be in tension with better AI, right? And driving more representative AI. And even some of the techniques that we need to rely on to hold AI in check, to test for bias, to test for fairness across different demographic groups, you need that information to be collected, right? Whether, you know, certain protected members are part of this group or not, in order to probe whether the AI models that you're developing are fair. And so I couldn't agree more. I think this is, you know, maybe this is another webinar series or discussion roundtable that could be really helpful for the community to dive into more, because I think that there are some really philosophical tensions there. It's not just about practical tensions. It's questions of what norms we want to establish and how we want to protect versus include versus, you know, all the other issues. But I think the other thing that I wanted to say in terms of, you know, the data governance question that Rachel hit on just a minute ago is just around, you know, in the field that I've worked in, again, focusing on more nascent markets, right? Like the kind of development side in these settings, as Rachel was saying, you've got so many different barriers standing in the way of good data governance, but also just good data in the first place, right? You have limited connectivity, you have limited usage of digital devices, or when you have that, it's uneven or unequal, right? Between genders or different groups. The digital divide is just a persistent challenge. And I think often the discussions that end up happening around the potential for AI and the great, you know, the great benefits that can come from AI stem from assumptions being made around how plentiful data are, right? That we're swimming in a sea of data, and often those assumptions just fall apart when you're in more rural contexts or more developing contexts. And that can be due to both physical issues, right? There's just lower, you know, access to connectivity and things like that. It can also be a conscious choice that's being made by communities to assert their sovereignty, right? Sometimes this practice of sharing data can be seen as very extractive and sometimes exploitative. And so you'll have situations where, I think, Rachel, you may have mentioned this already earlier, right? That indigenous groups are seeing this as an opportunity to assert their sovereignty by establishing that data can't be collected about them for purposes of feeding into some other decision-making or someone else's benefit. And so all of these issues, I think, need to be factored into what we consider when we say data governance. It's not enough just to say more, you know, freer flows of information, more open data. There are a lot of different contexts that need to be understood as we push for some of these more, I think, broadly beneficial data governance moves. And so I think it's just an interesting thing to keep circling around as we figure out, and again, this is something that the index helps us to do, is to figure out what we actually want to encapsulate in terms of norms, in terms of values, with the governance approaches that we take here. I could go on for a long time about this particular question. I think I'll hand it over to Emma, but we can come back if there are other thoughts here, because there's a lot to be said around the challenges that stem from a lack of representative data. and how that feeds into AI. And so if that's something that this community is already tracking, I don't want to belabor that point, but I do think that it's a really important one to double click on, or whatever the right metaphor is. When you are lacking information about a certain group and you develop an AI model to serve that group based off of information from another community, you're likely not going to be serving that community with fidelity, right? So say you make a model that's based off of images off of ImageNet, an open source repository, and the people that you're meaning to serve are not actually represented in that, you end up with all sorts of issues that I think the index and other principles efforts are meant to address. So I'll stop there. Again, I can keep going, but Emma, I want to make sure that I'm not speaking over your time for this.
I love the passion, right? That's how we are in this field, especially if you're working in nonprofit, and the challenges are huge here. Emma?
Yes, I think the most important issue to highlight is the real problem of what is called data colonialism or AI colonialism. And it's not enough. It's not as if anybody in this on this call, that nobody on this call is aware of that. Of course, all of us are aware of it, but understanding the real obstacles in trying to combat that is hard. And it links to the representativeness of data. And also, if you think in terms of generative AI, I always say generative AI because I'm South African, but generative AI, try to sound more international. Scraping information and images and pieces of text from the internet means that you scrape what is there. But if there are external reasons for people across the world not to be represented on the internet, obviously they become invisible, or they can be manipulated in some ways. That's the one thing. The other thing in overcoming this divide is understanding that the countries that are again on the receiving end of invisibility sometimes have really bigger issues to think about. We can think that this is the biggest issue, that all of us should only think all the time about how we are being manipulated by big tech companies and what happens to our privacy. But here in South Africa, for instance, we sincerely worry about whether we will have electricity or not in the next hour, whether we will have water or not in the next hour. And it's becoming an actual real problem. So, people on the ground will lack awareness of, becoming activists for data justice. And on the one hand, I always say the secret weapon of AI ethicists is civil society, but that means that you have to have an aware civil society. And raising awareness is not the same in Ghana as it is in the US, because there are different obstacles. So a big issue remains, and I mean, Rachel also, she didn't use the term, but she also touched on that, is then this issue, and Albra talked about the representativeness of data. So, that's the one issue for me. But the other issue is also to understand that how to make ordinary people understand that issues and governments, many governments, in fact, that I have experience of, understand that if you talk about data, you are not just talking about privacy and protection of information. And then some people are waking up to bias, but they completely underestimate exactly what it means, and what it takes to ensure good data sets, quality data sets, and to track bias, and to also always remember the flip side of amplifying identity prejudice in favor of one particular group obviously discriminates against another group. But then the flip side of that is that there are, again, groups that are not even on the spectrum. They can't be discriminated against because they don't exist, because we don't have data about them. And that should make you angry on the one hand, if you are invisible in this sense. Some people can think you should be just be lucky. Maybe you're lucky, but you're not, because you will not have access. You will have allocation harm. You will experience that even if you're not aware of it. Which means that sometimes other people have to speak up on behalf of these invisible groups. And then lastly, I think what is really also important for me is to flag the issue to ordinary people that they have data responsibility. And the reason why they have this is because you have the right to mental integrity. You have the right not to be manipulated. And it's a basic right that you have, but also because the kind of power that we're talking about here isn't necessarily power that is lodged with governments. Remember, when we think about uprisings and activism, we think about standing up against governments. We need to stand now. The enemy is something completely different, because we're dealing with these big tech companies that are transnational and that will wield the political power that their manipulation brings them in unprecedented and maybe unimagined ways. So that big danger, and I think is not underscored enough in conversations around data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma, for such passionate input. Since we are 10 minutes from the end of the webinar, I would love if people want to raise their hands to make comments or questions, and really share your experience about all of this. We have some very interesting comments in the chat. And one thing I want to mention, right, is the idea, if I've been working with internet issues for like almost 25 years now, right? And if you guys remember on political economy, we have the expression of wall gardens, right? So I wonder if we are gonna see wall gardens around technologies such as AI and even XR, right? Virtual reality, et cetera, because of how we govern data in these technologies, and because who we want to represent or not, because sometimes not representing groups are part of a business model and a business strategy, right? So how are we going to deal with those issues and those people that are left behind? And so much of that now, we are dependent so much on that because of, for example, digital transformation of public services, so far and so on, the adoption of digital ID. More and more society is dependent on all of this and is dependent on data. Anyway, so I'm just seeing all these connections happening, and we need to, as you said, Albra and Emma, address this in a much more holistic way, understand the complexity. It's beyond privacy, right? So I'm gonna just give the word to Juan and then Angela. Please just use like 1 minute so we can also invite others. Juan.
Hello, thank you very much. This was great. It's really, really exciting. I'm Juan de Gutierrez from Colombia. I'm an associate professor. I just wanted to know a bit more about the construction of the index in itself. Particularly, I've worked in other types of indexes, and I find that it's very important to distinguish policy and law adoption from policy and law implementation. And I'm aware that you mentioned that in your presentation, but I just wanted to know more about that. And also, I'm wondering whether, for example, the elements related to rule of law and transparency have also included a question on whether, for example, the regulations include algorithmic transparency and other types of obligations. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. So Rachel, do you want to address that? And if you also have any reactions to the previous comments by Emma and Alder?
Yeah, thank you, Carolina. I don't want to take up too much time. Just to kind of quickly flag that we are going to be making public the draft structure of the global index so that everyone can provide their comments and conducting some more consultation exercises on it. So we really want to try and get as many inputs and welcome any inputs that you might have. So
Rachel, sorry to interrupt you. Maybe we can even share specifically with the registrants of this webinar to make sure that everybody sees. Yes, we can talk about that later.
No, sure, absolutely. So, Yuan, on your question, 2 parts. So every thematic area is split up into 3 indicators. The first addresses framework, so the existence of laws, policies, white papers, those kinds of things. The second one addresses actions that governments have taken or other actors to advance implementation of those frameworks and the impacts that might have had. And then the third one is on actors. So who's involved in these efforts? So not just what role government is playing, but what role is civil society playing, what role are businesses playing, what's the impact of that? So we're really hoping to get something very nuanced, and it would be great to kind of have your specific inputs on that. And then algorithmic transparency registers, yes, we will be having a thematic area that addresses this separate to the principle on transparency. It's important to note, and this is something that Emma knows a lot about, but this index is trying to support well, the advancement of the kind of global agenda around responsible AI, so as many initiatives as possible, but quite specifically as well, the UNESCO recommendation, but by providing a tool to track the extent to which it's being implemented. So many of the thematic areas that we have included correspond to the values, principles, and policy action areas under the UNESCO recommendation. And then we have a few more that have arisen through our consultation exercise, including algorithmic transparency registers or a mechanism that functions similarly. Thanks, Carolina.
Thank you, Rachel. Angela, you have a question?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I was muted. My name is Angela. I am a PhD candidate in AI ethics in University of Otago in New Zealand. So sorry, I am in darkness, and so I'm not going to put on my video. Anyway, so my concern is actually about representation in AI ethics. I am originally a Kenyan, and I am concerned about what is happening actually in the space that we are discussing now. I feel like even when we talk about Africa, we talk about it as a monolith, and the representation for me is more like a continent and less like distinct ethnic groups that are existing in Africa and all that. And that's why Umbra Anthony pointed and I was actually appreciative of that comment that we cannot actually purport to be representing different diversity of groups, even in the panel that is happening now, when it is dominantly white panelists discussing the issues of AI ethics and all that. And I'm wondering how the global index is taking it up to ensure that we are actually bringing this diversity, we are actually bringing these voices, and we are actually bringing these people who are actually speaking for themselves, because I guess representation is not just talking about a person for them and for what they are going through. Because as a Black woman, no one can claim to be able to speak for me or to talk about bias, our experience bias, or how I experience different things that are happening in AI. So I feel like we need to scale the discussion further and bring forth more representative in terms of color, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of different experiences, because this is still lacking within us who are actually addressing issues of AI ethics. And if it lacks scaling down the result of what AI ethics will produce, we are also going to reproduce biasness that we are trying to fight. That is my comment on this.
Thank you, Angela, so much. Emma, Albrecht, Rachel, do you want to comment on that? I know you work a lot with regional organizations.
I mean, maybe I can just comment from the Global Index point of view. I mean, I think, Angela, your concerns are very valid. I think they're spot on, and thank you for your contribution. In terms of the Global Index, this is a project that's largely arising from a team that is based on the African continent. We have colleagues, a team member in Sudan, a team member in Kenya, a couple of us here in South Africa, complemented by other colleagues that are based in other parts of the world. So we are within the composition of the team far more diverse than what I represent. And then within the thematic focus areas of the index, we really want to do more in ensuring that we are addressing concerns and the issues that we hear from the consultations that we are having. So, I mean, we have a standalone section on gender and looking at intersectional issues. Within this, we have a section on bias, and then gender and bias cross-cut throughout some of the other dimensions as well. So I'd be very happy to share this with you and have your inputs on this, because I think there's always more we can do, there's always more we can learn, and I think this is going to be an ongoing effort. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We reached the hour, and I just want to say, please keep in touch. Take a look at the chat. There are lots of interesting questions. I think Fabrizio also put some questions in the chat that perhaps the speakers can also address separately. But I want to thank you all for your time and your experience today. And please make sure to keep an eye on the announcements for our next webinars. If I'm not wrong, the next one is going to be focused in Latin America. So I hope to see many of you there. And Anna, any final words?
No, I just want to say thank you all. Thank you for the Datasphere for co-hosting this with us, and Rachel and the speakers. Thank you so much. We will continue this conversation, and we hope to see you in the next webinar. Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.